Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Ask Dr. Be Good show, the show where we bring you the politics, the pedagogy, and the practice around public education. And as always, we're never short on news. So because it's always a fast 30, let's get started. I wanted to bring you something from the federal side. You know, the federal government, as much as they say they want us to have local control, really likes to have control. So let's see what Biden's education department has laid out to make college more affordable. And just spoiler alert, it did not include broad student loan forgiveness, which is something he's run on and just not been able to follow through on. So Education Secretary Miguel Cardona outlined priorities for his department in a speech delivered Thursday. And while college affordability was the main focus, a broad student loan forgiveness didn't make the cut. Cardona's first major address laid out how he plans to address four major priorities in his department: supporting students through pandemic recovery, addressing opportunities and achievement gaps, ensuring that higher education leads to successful careers, and making higher education more inclusive and affordable. On the last item, Cardona acknowledged the soaring cost of college and how they can lead to a lifetime of student debt for some of those who seek higher education. But he stopped short of detailing a plan for broad relief. It is also unacceptable to be burdened with unmanageable loan debt for several decades because you chose to earn a college degree, he said. Too many talented Americans are choosing against enrolling in higher ed due to the fear of debt and feeling that college is out of reach. And so, you know, we maintain a posture of neglect when post-secondary education is out of reach for all students and their families. This is un-American. Here's how Cardona says he plans to tackle college affordability: continue providing targeted student loan relief to certain groups of borrowers, adding to the $15 billion already canceled for those defrauded by for-profit schools and with those with disability. And also enacting stricter enforcement on colleges that mislead and defraud borrowers, and ensuring borrowers have loan repayment options that match their financial situation. And last one is implementing long-term improvements to loan forgiveness programs like the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program, and creating a strong gainful employment rule to ensure borrowers have good job opportunities. Cardona began to carry out reforms, but President Biden's campaign promise of $10,000 in student loan relief for every federal borrower went unmentioned. Along with the $15 billion in relief that Cardona referenced, Biden had also extended the pause on student loan payments 3 times, with the most recent extension being through May 1st. And during that time, the Education Department prepared a memo on Biden's legal ability to cancel student debt broadly using executive action, but recently released documents that found that White House officials saw the memo in April and choosing not to release it. That has prompted 85 Democratic lawmakers on Wednesday to not only call on Biden to release the memo, but also to cancel up to $50,000 in student debt per federal borrower before payments resume May 1st. The White House responded to that letter by noting that no one has been required to pay a single dime in federal loans under Biden, while adding that if Congress sends Biden a bill to cancel $10,000 in student debts per borrower, which is his campaign promise, he would be happy to do that. So it's unclear when or if federal borrowers will experience broad relief. When asked about the issue, Cardona has frequently said that conversations are continuing on the issue, but he has not commented on the student debt memo and says that he remains focused on targeted relief he has already begun to carry out, along with ensuring everyone can have access to higher education. Students today, with a greater sense of urgency, the government is recommitting to fulfilling the promise to support you as you seek the education that will give you the tools to enjoy life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, said Cardona. Let's get to work. So again, a little bit typical politics, right? A lot of promises and talk about the promises. And so, but you know, if even cutting $10,000 from student debt per federal borrower would probably give a lot of relief to students, probably save them 10 years of payment and possibly let them be able to afford other things like maybe a house, to maybe buy a house. Yeah, things are very hard to find rents and homes that are affordable for people who don't have high-paying jobs. That's another big area that they're having to work on. And there's an article that I hope is not really rubbing it in too much, but folks, you know that we have a looming teacher shortage, education shortage, because it's not only teachers, but it's bus drivers, food staff. I don't know if teaching assistants, I haven't heard that as much, but here's an article that caught my eye to reinforce what we're seeing out there. And then I'm going to share my solution, at least what I can do, because, you know, I can't solve the whole problem, but I can solve part of the problem possibly, or in my part of the area of town, so to speak. So I'll share with that. This says substitute teachers make $13 an hour. Is that enough to show up during the pandemic? And so, and of course, we know as teachers call out with and stay out with COVID, school districts are desperate to get more subs in. And this is an interesting story. You know, articles often start with stories, right? Since the start of the pandemic, Lutheran pastor Clint Schneckloff has been trying to lean into where we see the most pressing needs. And this has included helping immigrants and people struggling to make their rent. But now, guess what? He's a substitute teacher. The Fayetteville, Arkansas pastor handed in paperwork for background check in December and watched a brief series of instructional videos, most of them focused on student safety. And then 2 weeks ago, he took his first gig as a high school biology sub. The hallway where Schneckloff, it's an interesting name, Schneckloth, Schneckloff taught, had 3 biology labs, but teachers were absent in all 3 of them. The substitute shortage in Fayetteville is the same problem faced by school districts all across the country. Huge numbers of teachers and school personnel are calling out sick, and there aren't enough people to step in. The pandemic introduced me to this issue of schools struggling to get good subs, but it's been around a long time, and the bar for hiring is really low, he said. No national data is available on teacher absences yet. It will be soon because it's just such an issue. But local statistics are striking. One recent day in January, 800 teachers in Hawaii were called out sick with COVID, and another 800 were gone for another reason, leaving 400 teacher desks across the state unfilled after substitutes were called in. Dozens of other schools across the country have recently switched to virtual learning amid teacher shortages. Schools are going to need more subs if they want to stay open during COVID waves. While Omicron laid that problem bare, the subs shortage existed long before the pandemic. Schools lean on teachers to keep regular schedules and for years have operated with shortages of subs, in part because of underpaying and underhiring subs saves districts money. And, you know, I saw that play out myself. Matter of fact, a lot of times one is not allowed to have long-term subs in there without bumping their pay up. And so anytime you don't have to do that, you know, all public school districts are on very, very tight budgets, right? So what's happened during the pandemic, especially, is that there's just not enough people who look at substituting and say, I want to sign up for that job. Today, job seekers have more and more options, and within education, and also, of course, within other jobs outside of education. It's systemic issues that we've had for a long time that are coming to peak at this moment. In Oklahoma, police officers stepped in to cover 6th grade in mid-January when teachers were sparse. In New Mexico, the governor called in the National Guard to cover for teachers in classrooms. Just days later, announced that she herself would sign up to be a sub. This is the governor of New Mexico. In Texas, one school district issued a public plea to parents to apply to be substitutes in the classrooms early last month. And remember, I suggested that. The superintendent of another Texas district in Austin said central staff were prepared to fill in. I may be teaching science or math at high school classrooms, said Stephanie Elizalde, superintendent at Austin Independent School District, told local news. And I know her. I remember when she was in Dallas. Great lady. And willing to take the hit and go into the classroom if that's what needs to be. In some cases, teachers have tested positive for COVID and had to quarantine because they were exposed or needed to care for a loved one Others have taken mental health leave or caught the seasonal flu. People who, normal everyday stuff, exacerbated by the COVID. Many teachers have reasons to be cautious about COVID. 1.5 million teachers, or 24% of the workforce, have a condition that puts them in risk for serious illness if they develop COVID, said a 2020 Kaiser Family Foundation survey. Schools are meanwhile under increasing pressure to stay open as states pass laws or executive orders telling school districts to offer in-person classes to students. Despite union concerns about teacher safety, it isn't just red states who have ordered classrooms back to school. Washington State and Massachusetts are among those where state governments issued orders requiring in-person learning, and Rhode Island worked to keep schools open through the pandemic. These orders helped assuage concerns that students would fall irrevocably behind. Because it's been a long time, right? It's been now going on 2 years next month. So during a massive COVID surge like Omicron, some schools haven't had a choice, but they've had to stay home. I know my daughter's school up in Kentucky. They're allowed to have at-home learning days when, a certain percentage of the staff is out with COVID. But finding subs was a challenge before, and it's a bigger challenge now. So a study in an urban school district in the Journal of Education, Finance, and Policy found that teachers were absent an average of 11.8 days during the school year, while substitute teachers covered 10.9 days, leaving each teacher without coverage for an average of 1 day a year. Less advantaged schools in the district typically had less coverage from substitutes than more affluent schools, indicating that substitute shortages affect low-income students more than others. Surprise, that always happened. Despite widespread reports of burnout, labor economists aren't yet sure if teachers are quitting and creating extra vacancies in the classroom, further exacerbating the need for substitutes. There's also little data about whether subs themselves have quit. Among all public school employees, including support staff and administrators, federal data indicates that there's been an increase in resignations during COVID, said Nick Bunker, head of research for North America at the job search site Indeed. But there isn't yet data showing if school employees are switching schools, retiring, or leaving the profession entirely in search of better pay and less stress. I'm reading that they're not coming back. We saw a dramatic rise in wage growth in 2021, but we didn't see much of that in the public sector. You could imagine that people working in education could be looking around saying, what's happening in other parts of the economy should be happening to us. It's not, so we're leaving. Other sectors outside of education have seen good wage increases, but not in teaching. So they may be looking to leave teaching to be able to tap into those increases. So what is substitute teaching? Well, in many ways, it's high stress work for low pay. Prior to the pandemic, the average pay for subs was $13.84, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistic numbers, less than the starting hourly pay for a barista at Starbucks. Subbing does not usually come with benefits, professional development, or a guarantee of day-to-day employment. It's unpredictable. Subs show up for a day of work at a new school without knowing where to park the cars, use the bathroom, or take a break. Then they could repeat the process again the next day at another school. Many schools are reporting that it's a challenge to hire staff and subs in particular. Last fall, more than 3/4 of the school district administrators said they had struggled to hire enough sub teachers, according to a survey by Education Week. Schools were also in dire need of other support staff, with 68% reporting problems hiring bus drivers and 55% struggling to hire paraprofessionals. The need for teachers was somewhat lower, with 48% of districts reporting hiring enough. That's half. 48 is almost half. Asked how they're responding to the shortages, administrators' most common answer was that they were changing the role or the pay, but that they were asking current employees to take on additional responsibilities. There's no standard training or education required for sub-teachers, and most are not required to have teaching degrees. Some areas have responded to the current shortage by dropping their standards. I remember telling you all that Oregon had temporarily lifted its conditions that teachers have a college degree. And I believe you can be 18 now there, right? Ooh. Other districts have significantly boosted pay or started offering sign-on bonuses that would have been unimaginable in the past. Matter of fact, we weren't allowed to. It was unheard of to use taxpayer money for sign-on bonuses, but now you have to. So in Fayetteville, where Shenetcloth is teaching, the daily rate for substitutes went from $91 to $120 a day this year. In New Jersey, a district outside of Newark doubled its pay in December from $125 to $250 a day. And I want to tell you something, I bet they didn't, I'm sure they had more, but I bet they didn't have all they needed because it's that hard. Higher pay could help schools draw in more subs, but some experienced educators and administrators argue that schools that want to stay open could also benefit from breaking away from the traditional 20 students in a classroom model and a concept that isn't being discussed at the school level. So, I mean, but it's good to hear that people are trying to be innovative during this time. But innovation oftentimes very easily runs up against fast naysayers who don't want to take the time to consider the innovation. Schools could try to take advantage of technology and tap more non-teachers to help in classrooms, like local nonprofit employees or park and rec departments, said Kyla Henderson, former chancellor of DC Public Schools. Certified teachers would still need to teach a complicated tasks like reading, but non-teachers could play supportive roles and allow more kids to learn from my certified teacher for a part of the day. Certified teachers are incredibly important, but they're also people who are reaching out to kids every day who can support, supplement, complement their work, you know, in addition to that certified teacher, right? So what you can't say is our teaching job is untenable and nobody else can do it but us. Well, no. So what happens is people with means and access will figure out ways to figure this out, said Henderson. The most marginal people will be stuck with a system that doesn't work. Before the pandemic, a small number of school districts has started to rethink how they approach staffing to avoid the scramble for substitutes. Central Falls School District in northeastern Rhode Island decided to combat its chronic lack of subs by creating a one-year fellowship for people who are interested in teaching or have recently graduated with a teaching degree. The fellows embed at one school, substituting for whatever teachers are out that day, and they're guaranteed employment 5 days a week, given a professional development opportunity throughout the year. And then the district hires them out of the fellowship pool, making the position yet more attractive in addition to being a resume boost for aspiring teachers. And you know, this brings to mind that up north, I remember having a teacher friend that went up to New York State, and it took her years on the substitute list to get the chance at an opportunity to interview for an opening at a school. Because up there, the pay is high. Unions tend to help force higher pay, and teachers didn't leave. The attrition rate was very, very low. And it took her literally years as a sub before she was offered a job. Down south, not so much. That was, you know, the pay is much lower. And in many cases, the pay down here is probably probably to about 2/3 of what it is up north. So, I mean, that's a difference. You have teachers making 100,000 up there easily, whereas down here, it is a rare case that a teacher is able to, in your biggest urban districts, to get to 100,000 through incentives, extra certifications, work, and so forth. Very rare. So Central Falls is a small district, and about 1/3 of its students are English language learners. The district has to be conscious about setting aside money to hire full-time subs. But while many districts don't have enough subs, Central Falls gets applicants for its fellowship positions each year. Anticipating COVID absences, the district was easily able to ramp up and hire an additional 10 fellows this year. And so that's very innovative and, you know, something for other districts to think about, but it doesn't mean the district hasn't had issues. One recent week, more than 100 staff members, about 20% of the district, were out of school. So they do face the same issues. It just, they are, you know, have a plan that makes it not quite so painful. Again, wanting that innovative thinking again, right? And our last article is one that is going to require a little bit of opening one's mind and being reflective, and because this is a continuing conversation. This is pride flags and Black Lives Matter signs in the classroom. Are they supportive symbols or propaganda? Okay, so that's before you sort of jump, because a lot of us already think we know or have an opinion on that. Let's talk about, let's walk through this. Should a teacher be allowed to place the Black Lives Matter sticker on their desk, or let students know they oppose racism, or hang a pride flag from their door to let their LGBT students know that the classroom is a safe space? Or are those actions another way for teachers to politically influence and divide students? Across the country in recent months, board members, administrators, and teachers have been at odds over the express purpose of Black Lives Matter logos and pride flags, and what free speech rights teachers have when it comes to decorating their classrooms. Dozens of educators across the country have recently been asked or ordered to take down stickers, posters, banners, and flags containing these symbols. One such district in Newberg, Oregon, where a school community's divided opinions on whether pride flags and Black Lives Matter symbols are signs of support for historically marginalized students, or are they political and inflammatory symbols that have resulted in multiple lawsuits? So elsewhere, districts in Indiana, Nevada, and Utah have all banned teachers from displaying the pride flag or Black Lives Matter symbols, or both, since November 2020. In September 2020, a teacher in Texas was fired after she refused to stop wearing her Black Lives Matter face mask. Last fall, a teacher in Iowa was put on administrative leave after he included a pride flag in presentation about images that described him and told students when asked that he was bisexual. And in September 2021, a teacher in Missouri resigned after being forced to take down a pride flag in his classroom and forced to sign a letter prohibiting him from discussing sexuality or sexual preference. In Newberg, the uproar started when the school board members issued a directive August 2021 meeting ordering the superintendent to enforce the removal of all Black Lives Matter and pride flags, posters, banners, stickers, pins, and clothing from school buildings. A month later, the board scrapped the policy based on legal advice and passed a new iteration which banned all symbols that can be considered political, quasi-political, or controversial. We've hijacked a beautiful rainbow sticker into something different. It's political, Newberg board member Babe Brown, who voted for the ban, said during a board meeting last summer. These things are dividing our school. The district teacher union, along with American Civil Liberties Union of Oregon, has sued, calling the ban arbitrary, confusing, and an infringement on teachers' free speech. Andrew Gallagher, a high school history teacher and a plaintiff in the teachers union lawsuit, said he believes that the board members' agenda is driven by national movements to censor conversations about race and gender in the classrooms. The vagueness around the definitions of controversial and political have caused confusion among educators, Gallagher said. Who's going to be the arbiter of what is considered controversial, he said, and it creates a chilling effect for our staff, which does impede on our free speech. At the August board meeting, several parents urged the board to reconsider the directive, but a few were in support of the ban on the Black Lives Matter and pride flags. So Newberg parent Raquel Peregrino de Britoa said LGBT propaganda causes gender dysphoria And the BLM is designed to be divisive. So schools should just be instead about math and reading. There are only two genders and all lives matter, she said during the school board meeting in August. The BLM and LGBTQ ideology and curriculum are shattering the innocence of children, promoting racial divide, and negatively impacting the lives of our kids forever. Generally speaking, teachers have few rights when it comes to free speech in the classroom, said Richard Geisel, a lawyer and professor of education leadership at Grand Valley State University of Michigan. A school board has the right to tell teachers what they can and can't do if it's trying to eliminate disruption to learning, assuming the board's policy comes from a neutral perspective. In Newberg's case, the first policy the school board passed in August of 2021 that specifically banned rainbow flags and Black Lives Matter symbols would likely have been discriminatory, Geisel said. If their policy just singled out certain viewpoints, it is not generally applicable. And that's problematic. In its newest policy that bans political or controversial symbols, that might be harder to challenge. I think it's pretty typical to go into a public school these days and find those symbols for those express purposes of helping all students feel included and welcome. But to what extent are they both messages of inclusion as well as potentially political statements? I don't know the answer to that. It's going to be interesting for the court to wrestle with that. So for students of color and LGBTQ who disproportionately experience discrimination in school buildings, symbols such as Black Lives Matter or the Pride flag can be useful tools for political, for navigating the social and physical surrounding. LGBTQ students experience stronger academic outcomes as well as more positive emotional and mental health outcomes when schools are inclusive and affirming. And it's a visible display of support for LGBTQ students like Pride flags that are critical components of creating the kind of welcoming environment that helps young people be successful in schools. The Black Lives Matter hashtag is perceived by many educators to serve a similar function. It was created in 2013 in response to the acquittal of Trayvon Martin's murderer, George Zimmerman. The movement gained traction as Black Lives Matter because the rallying cry of protests against police brutality across the country followed the George Floyd murder in 2020. It's really only controversial if you believe in white supremacy. If only white folks belong in our school and only white folks need to be comfortable, have their identity affirmed, then a Pride flag or BLM poster disrupts that comfort. So where are we on this in your mind, folks? Because this is not going away. It's not right to have a portion of our kids not feel safe and comfortable in their own schools. And I think that we, as adults, demean kids, especially our older kids, who need to be reflective, need to be Socratically thinking about all of these issues and helping them come to inclusive conclusions. It's really hard to do that when we try to sweep all this under the rug. We try to take books out of libraries. Folks, this is not 1950. We never wanted to be the 1950s, right? We want to be a bigger, better 21st century. And to be a bigger, better 21st century, we need to include everybody in our heart environment, heart and mind environment, and letting people feel safe and supported and comforted in their schools and in their neighborhoods and their communities is something we all need to work hard at doing better. So, let me know what you think. But letting all students feel included is our job as adults, whether teachers, whether educators or not. Okay, everyone, as always, it's that time time's up. And so let's go ahead and let me wish you a happy week. Be safe. I hope all of you were safe during the Snowmageddon. Different parts of the country had it different times last week. But as always, if you have public education questions, issues, the Ask Dr. Be Good show is where you come. Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of the week.